Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You get updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. You can get updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can also email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. We're always looking for interesting weather pictures from around your area. We can highlight it in our show. We are looking now, we don't have any active watches, warnings, or advisories out for the state. However, we did have the flood advisory out for the Taku River near Juneau that we do have canceled now. However, even though the advisory is canceled, there is still high water on the river, so please use caution if you're going to be around the Taku River. And we can notice on this hydrograph in the image here that we did reach action stage with those water levels, but now we can start to see that on the decline. We also had an interesting event happen in Nome today as an aircraft was flying overhead, saw muskox near the city field. So that was from a pilot report that we received earlier today of, again, a muskox in the field area around Nome. And then we do have a 3-day outlook here for Anchorage. This was posted by the National Weather Service office, or forecast office in the Anchorage office. This is a 3-day outlook for areas around South Central. It is going to be cooler than what the South Central area has seen over the weekend. However, some of those areas like Palmer are still going to get up pretty high. Going to see the highest temperatures on Tuesday with areas around Palmer getting up to as high as 75 degrees, dropping down into the 50s for all these locations around South Central. As you get further to the south, staying a little bit cooler in areas like Homer, getting up into the mid-60s by Wednesday, but still getting up to 70 in Soldotna on Tuesday. Anchorage is going to stay in the upper 60s on Tuesday, but other days on Monday and Wednesday getting into the mid-60s, dropping down into the 50s overnight. So a little bit warmer than seeing all those 70s in Anchorage over the weekend. Taking a look now at our fire danger, we are going to have some danger up continuing in the upper Yukon Valley area, also in western to west central areas of the North Slope area, some fire danger there. Down in the Mat-Su valleys, we are going to have some fire danger, and then in places around Kenai Peninsula, especially in the western locations. And then in the northern areas around the Lynn Canal area, we are going to have some fire danger there as well. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we have multiple waves moving through the area. We can see one over the southwestern portion of the state. We can see as we watch this loop again, the low pressure center itself moving in around the Alaska Peninsula area, extending some rain into these locations. High pressure to the west of that low, we can see with some of the lower cloud cover underneath that high pressure. You can see it by the darker colors. Not those, as we look out over the western Aleutian Islands, we can see some of that lighter cloud cover, but if you can see some of the grayer areas, that's that lower cloud cover, that stratus and fog that we are seeing out underneath the high pressure. And then finally, we'll take a look much further to the east by the southeastern portion of the state where we have some cloud cover and lingering shower activity out there. And as we look up over the eastern portions of the interior, we can see some of the convective activity that's spinning up there, expecting some thunderstorms to continue into the evening hours. So as we look for the weather for the remainder of the day, we'll just start off in mainland Alaska out for those eastern locations, seeing some thunderstorm activity lasting into these evening hours, especially for the eastern locations of the interior, extending down to the Alaska Range as well. As we move further to the north, we are going to see some areas of fog along the Arctic coastline, starting to mix with rain as we get closer towards the Kaktovik area. The remainder of the interior, even though we have some upper level cloud cover moving through the area, not expecting that to result in any precipitation for much of the central and western portions of the interior. However, as we get to the west coast of the state, some lingering cloud cover due to that low pressure system by the Alaska Peninsula, bringing some showers to southwest Alaska. However, as we get out over the water, we are going to see some stratus out over the Bering, so we are going to see some fog with that, mixing with that rain just off the coastline of the eastern portions of the Bering down into the Bristol Bay area as that low pressure pushes through to the east. And then we will have some rain from that, also extending up into the Kodiak Island area and southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula. Out over the remainder of the Bering, we can see high pressure sitting just to the south of the Central Aleutian Islands, extending and ridging up over much of the Bering Sea, where we will see some areas of fog continuing there. And we do have that mixing with rain as we have different shortwaves moving over top of that ridging, bringing in some rain to mix in with that fog. Then as we move way out to the east for the Panhandle area, not a lot of precipitation until we get to southern locations where we are going to have some light showers in the area due to that low pressure further to the south. As we move into tonight, we are going to continue to see those lighter showers for the Panhandle area, especially in the southern locations, but some isolated showers can be expected in some areas further to the north, including the Yakutat area. Out over interior Alaska, low pressure extending some rain out over much of the eastern interior down into the Alaska Range and extending down into southwest Alaska as well. Our low pressure out over the Alaska Peninsula has extended now, or has pushed now to the east over Kodiak Island, continuing to bring rain to the area around the island as well as the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula. We are going to also see rain extending up the west coast of the state, and as we get out over the Bering Sea, expecting that rain to mix with fog, and we're going to continue to see fog out over the Bering and Aleutian Islands due to that high pressure that is near the central Aleutian Islands slowly pushing off to the east. As we look up along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see lingering fog up there as well, especially from the Utqiagvik area and further to the east. As we move into Monday, we are going to see that fog clear up along the Arctic coastline, but we're going to see more widespread showers through much of the southern portions of the interior, extending down into some locations of south central Alaska, especially higher elevations, and then down through much of southwest Alaska as well. In the eastern portions of the interior, again expecting to see some isolated thunderstorms develop in the afternoon and evening hours. And then as we push down into southeast Alaska, going to continue to see isolated showers down there as well. Should be pretty light, but we will see some of that, or see a little bit more intense as we get further to the south and more southern locations of the Panhandle. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, going to continue to see high pressure with fog underneath as that high pressure is slowly moving to the east now over the eastern Aleutian Islands on Monday. We will see that fog mix with rain, especially in the northern locations of the Bering Sea, as we have some of that precipitation riding over top of our ridging. Then as we move into Tuesday, that ridging starting to weaken a little bit as it pushes still further to the east, with some waves moving up that western side of it, bringing some rain to the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. And also we're going to have some of those lingering showers pushing through to the northern part of the Bering Sea, riding over top of our ridge to the St. Matthew Island area, to Nunavik Island, some places around St. Lawrence Island as well, with some showers out over southwest Alaska, extending up the west coast to the Seward Peninsula area. Out over mainland Alaska, we're expecting to see more widespread rain and showers on Tuesday, especially with the thunderstorm activity developing in central portions of the interior, parts of the Brooks Range, and in eastern portions of the interior as well. And we do expect some of that to move down into the Alaska Range, with some lingering light isolated showers in areas around south central Alaska. Down in the Panhandle area, we're going to have some showers continuing over the area. Should be fairly light still on Tuesday. However, we have that other system moving just to the south of the Panhandle area, bringing some showers up from the south. For our temperatures for our Monday morning lows, we'll start off in the Panhandle area. Temperatures dropping down to around 50 degrees for all of the Panhandle. A little bit cooler by Yakutat, dropping down to 47 degrees Monday morning. Out over south central Alaska, dropping down into the mid to lower 50s. A lot of places further to the south going to get a little bit cooler, down to around 52 for Homer and Kenai. And then Kodiak a little bit warmer, 54 degrees expected low Monday morning. In the interior portions of the state, dropping down into the mid 50s. For most locations, that's going to extend out from eastern portions of the interior through the western portions and down into some areas of southwest Alaska as well. However, as we get to the YK Delta area, a little cooler there, dropping down into the mid 40s, and right along the water, dropping down into the lower 40s with 41 degrees for Macquarie and up there at Gamble. As we move up the west coast of the state, we are expecting temperatures to drop down into the 40s right by the water, but as we get a little bit more to the east, we are expecting those to be right or closer to 50 degrees. Along the Arctic coastline, going to be warmer out west, dropping down into the mid-40s and down into the mid-30s for areas further to the east. Down in the Bering Sea and Aleutians, we are expecting the Pribilof Islands to drop into the mid-40s with 45 at St. Paul, and then to the lower 40s for the Aleutians, with the Alaska Peninsula staying a little bit warmer into the upper 40s there. Monday afternoon highs, staying out in the Aleutian Islands, getting up to around 50 degrees for the Aleutians, mid-50s for the Pribilof Islands, upper 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and then into the 60s for the Bristol Bay area. Cooler once again for the YK Delta area, getting up into the 50s there. But as we get into interior portions of the state, continuing to get warmer and warmer until we get to the central interior, where we'll see our warmest temperatures in the mid-70s, dropping down a little bit once again, closer towards 70 as we get to the eastern interior, and then cooler again along the Arctic coastline, especially those places further to the east, getting up around 40 degrees there, but getting up even warmer to the western locations up into the 50s. Down in south central Alaska, temperatures getting up into the upper 50s for places near the water, but as we get into interior locations, getting up into the upper 60s towards 70 degrees for places like Glen Allen, getting up to 70 degrees for that Monday afternoon high. Down in the Panhandle area, getting up into those lower 60s is expected for most locations. Yakutat going to stay a little bit cooler. Temperatures dropping down Tuesday morning for the Panhandle area down into the lower 50s and into the lower 50s for South Central as well. This is going to be true for much of the locations in the interior, but colder as we get to Southwest Alaska, dropping down to the mid to upper 40s for most locations, as well as at the Seward Peninsula area. Up along the Arctic coastline, going to be a little bit colder into the mid 30s for eastern locations, mid 40s for places out west. And then all the way down in the Aleutian Islands, dropping down into the mid to lower 40s for most locations, 45 degrees for St. Paul. Let's look at our Tuesday afternoon highs, getting up into the 50s again for the Aleutians, getting up into the upper 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and into the mid 60s for the Bristol Bay area. Mid 50s to upper 50s for much of southwest Alaska and areas around the YK Delta area, but it getting higher and higher again as we move into the interior portions of the state. Mid 60s expected for the interior, with the highest in the right around 70 degrees for the Fort Yukon area. Up along the Arctic coastline, getting up into the 40s for the eastern locations and the 50s out west, with the mid 60s for most locations around south central Alaska, and then the lower mid 60s for much of the Panhandle area, a little bit warmer up by Haines at 67 degrees expected.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather. On Monday morning, starting off over the Bering Sea, widespread IFR conditions are expected. For the Aleutian Islands, MVFR and IFR conditions are expected. Those conditions are going to extend out over southwest Alaska, bringing IFR conditions through the YK Delta area and up much of the west coast through the western portions of the Seward Peninsula. Starting to see more MVFR as we move up along the coastline and then along the Arctic coastline. A mixture of MVFR and IFR conditions are expected. Much of the interior should stay VFR throughout Monday morning. However, south central Alaska will be primarily IFR with the exception of some areas around the Copper River Basin. Then down in the Panhandle area, we are expecting primarily MVFR conditions with some isolated areas of IFR. Then Monday afternoon, going to clear up in the Panhandle. Widespread VFR conditions are expected, primarily VFR conditions for south central Alaska as well, with some areas further to the south, such as the Kenai Peninsula, still seeing some IFR areas, and some MVFR and IFR for Kodiak Island. Much of mainland Alaska should be VFR, especially in the eastern locations, but as we get along the Arctic coastline, MVFR conditions are expected. Then MVFR conditions all along the west coast of the state as well, starting to mix in with some IFR conditions right near the water. Then down in the Bering Sea, widespread IFR conditions are expected, with MVFR and IFR expected for the Aleutian Islands. Moving into Tuesday morning, we are expecting widespread IFR conditions for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, extending into the Alaska Peninsula as well, with those MVFR conditions extending up into much of southwest portions of the state, with IFR conditions along much of the west coast and Arctic coastlines. For the central and eastern portions of the interior, VFR conditions are expected, and then MVFR and IFR conditions for south central Alaska, as well as down in the Panhandle area. However, northern locations of the Panhandle should still be VFR up in those northern places of Lynn Canal. Then in Tuesday afternoon, going to see a similar story in the Panhandle area, VFR conditions up north, with some IFR and MVFR further to the south. For south central Alaska, primarily VFR conditions. By the Gulf, we will see some MVFR, and in the western portions of the Alaska Range as well. Central and eastern portions of the interior should be VFR throughout Tuesday afternoon, but starting to get more MVFR as we get further to the west, and then IFR conditions along much of the west coastline. And then we are going to also see MVFR and IFR conditions along the Arctic coastline and widespread IFR conditions for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. For our passes starting up north on Monday, AKwx should be VFR throughout the day, as well as at Adigan Pass. As we move into the Alaska Range, lower conditions are expected. Lake Clark and Merrill should both be IFR throughout the day, as well as at Rainy Pass. Windy Pass should start off marginal and improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Isabel Pass will also start off marginal, improving to VFR. And Mintasta will see similarly starting off in VFR, improving to VFR conditions. Dehne Pass will start off IFR and improve all the way to VFR, as well as at Portage. And then Chilkoot and White should both remain VFR throughout the day on Monday. For our freezing levels, starting up north, we do have some pocket of colder air with freezing levels down to 4,000 with a really small area down to 2,000 feet, just off the eastern side of the northeastern part of the state. Tongue of warm air extending up much of the west coast of the state, bringing in those 10,000 foot lines up into the Kotzebue Sound area. And then down in the Aleutian Islands, we have the 12,000 foot line just to the south of the area. As we look at our icing, main area of concern is going to be just to the east of the northeastern portions of mainland Alaska. Above 7,000 feet is expected there of light icing. As we look at our jet stream, main area pushing through mainland Alaska is out of a northwesterly direction, 55 knots, coming in from the Arctic coastline through the eastern portions of the interior and south central Alaska, then exiting out in the eastern portions of the Gulf around 70 knots, but well south of the Panhandle area. Out over the Aleutian Islands, 60 knots out of a westerly direction for the eastern Aleutians. Strongest portion of the jet coming off of Kamchatka, 110 knots out of a westerly direction, dropping down closer to 75 knots by the central Bering. As we look down to 9,000 feet out over the Bering Sea, westerly winds 35 knots, diminishing as we get closer to the Aleutian Islands. For the Alaska Peninsula, northwesterly winds 25 knots expected. Pretty light winds over much of mainland Alaska, and in the eastern portions of the interior, seeing winds out of the west 25 knots, and weak over the Panhandle as well. Down to 3,000 feet, mainland Alaska and Panhandle pretty calm until we get down into southwest Alaska by the Bristol Bay area. Northerly winds 30 to 35 knots, strongest through the Alaska Peninsula. Out over the central and western portions of the Bering Sea, westerly winds 30 to 40 knots, strongest as we get further to the west, but with ridging out over the Aleutian Islands, expecting that to be weaker winds out over the islands. And then for our turbulence, for the western Aleutian Islands, below 3,000 feet is expected. As we move east towards the Alaska Peninsula and western portions of Kodiak Island, below 4,000 feet is expected.
We're at Vandenberg Air Force Base. We're about 20 minutes before the launch of ICESat-2. You might see the white light off in the distance. That's the Delta II rocket.
It kind of feels like an idea that was always going to just stay an idea. But no, it's real. It's sitting on top of the rocket.
You know, and for me, it's kind of surreal. Like you say, it's been 10 years, and it's hard to believe. It's like, we're really here? This is really about to happen? It's totally cool.
This is Dr. Tom Newman. Over the years, his work has taken him to some pretty remote areas to study changes in the ice regions of our planet. And his research, among many others, has defined the goals of the new NASA satellite, the Ice, Cloud, and Land Elevation Satellite 2, or ICESat-2.
And we have ignition. And
the story of ICESat-2 really begins with ICESat-1. ICESat told us all kinds of cool things about the ice sheet and about sea ice that we didn't really know to ask. That data allowed us to measure elevation change of ice sheets in a way that we hadn't been able to before, and showed that all the action on the ice sheets, the places that were really changing quickly, were around the edges. So when we were thinking about what could we do better next time, we knew that was one key component.
In addition to the edges of the ice sheets, ICESat-2 needed to measure a dimension of sea ice that remained elusive: its thickness. To figure out how thick sea ice is, you can measure the height of ice sticking out of the ocean, or freeboard, and compare it to the height of water between the sea ice flows, called leads.
The problem is, sea ice is really dynamic, and those cracks open and close various places in the ice pack throughout the day, throughout the year, and what we need to do is have measurements of the ocean whenever it's available, wherever it occurs in the sea ice pack.
To solve that problem, ICESat-2 was designed with a fast pulsing laser instrument to take precise, near-continuous measurements across its 3 pairs of beams. For 10 years, everything about the mission was designed to measure rapid changes in the most rapidly changing part of the cryosphere. But it has to get into space first.
But it's a huge transition going from the ground to in space. We've spent better part of 10 years, thousands of people have been involved, and actually seeing the rocket there on the pad with all of that work kind of all put together in one place, it's pretty amazing. And then getting up in the middle of the night to go watch the actual launch, it's sort of surreal in a way, because you've put so much time into it for so long, and actually seeing it over there is like, whoa, you know, it's a big deal.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. That's off. That's 1.
That was awesome. Totally cool. There it went. That was Atlas. The last Delta II, heading on out.
So Atlas has been turned on over the course of the first few weeks of the mission, really culminating for us with the laser. So this is our first look at sea ice data from ICESat-2, and it looks fantastic. The signal levels look great. We've got plenty of photons there. We're capturing ridges. We can clearly see the ocean. All sorts of cool stuff in there, and this is just our first data. It's only going to get better from here on out.
The data from ICESat-2 is well on its way into digging deeper into the unknown dimensions of sea ice sheets, and glaciers. It will shed light on changes in sea level and global weather patterns, and once again find new things about ice we didn't know to ask.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
Slight chance the flight may see ICESat-2 in their center windscreen. 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, that's gonna 5, 4, 3, 2.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For our marine section, we'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Ice along the northwest coastline up through about the AKwx area. We are looking at much of the ice being gone, even though there are still some very small amounts near the coast. And however, from AKwx and areas further to the east to around the Prudhoe Bay area, there is still quite a bit of thicker ice there. However, it does continue to slowly degrade, but due to the thickness, it will take some time for it to fully go away. Taking a look now in southeast Alaska, starting off in the inside waters, southerly winds around 10 knots, picking up to 20 knots as we get closer towards Lynn Canal. Out over the Gulf, light and variable winds around 10 knots. Then on Tuesday, continuing to see light winds in the Gulf, but picking up more of a direction in the eastern portions of the Gulf, southeasterly 10 to 15 knots. And then as we get closer up to the northern side of the Gulf, westerly winds 10 to 15 knots. In the inside waters, southerly winds 10 to 15 knots, again strongest as we get further to the north. For the south central area out over the Gulf, somewhat southerly flow around 10 knots, and that's going to go into Prince William Sound as well. Seas pretty low, around 3 feet in the Gulf. Around the Barren Islands, easterly winds 15 knots on the east side, becoming south 15 knots on the west side, and then in Cook Inlet, southerly winds 15 knots. On Tuesday, flow in Cook Inlet becoming westerly around 10 knots. Strongest winds in the area are going to be around the Barren Islands, coming out of the Kamishak Bay Gap, around 30 knots there. Seas as high as 11 feet west of the Barren Islands. Out over the rest of the Gulf, westerly winds 10 to 15 knots and 10 knots out of the west in Prince William Sound. For Monday, around the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, starting off by Kodiak Island, somewhat westerly winds around 20 knots, picking up to 25 knots as we get by the Bristol Bay area and south of the Kodiak Island area. And then as we drop down even further to the south in the Alaska Peninsula, dropping back down to 20 knots out of a westerly direction, becoming northwesterly on the Pacific side. On Tuesday, continuing to see primarily a westerly direction, starting off by the Cold Bay area around 15 knots, increasing with speed as we get further and further closer to our Kodiak Island, where we are going to see 25 knots out of that westerly direction by Kodiak Island, with seas as high as 7 feet east of Kodiak Island. Then on Monday for the Aleutian Islands, starting off by the eastern Aleutians, winds southwest 10 to 15 knots, highest on the Bering side. Becoming more southerly as we move further to the west, around 15 knots, and picking up to as high as 20 knots by the western Aleutian Islands. Seas highest out there as well at 7 feet. Then on Tuesday, becoming more easterly by the western Aleutians, around 15 knots, Staying more west or easterly as we move to the central Aleutian Islands, 15 to 20 knots, highest on the Bering side, or on the Pacific side rather, and then becoming southerly around 10 to 15 knots for the eastern Aleutians, highest on the Pacific side. On the west coast of the state, southwesterly winds around 20 knots for southern locations, becoming more westerly as we get into the Norton Sound area, around 20 knots there. And then on Tuesday, weaker winds up by Norton Sound, southwesterly winds 10 knots for St. Lawrence Island as well, getting up to as high as 20 knots around Nunavik Island and by St. Matthew Island. And then out by the Pribilof Island, southwesterly winds 15 knots there. Seas as high as 7 feet by the St. Matthew Island area. Along the Arctic coastline, starting out by the Beaufort Sea, easterly winds around 10 knots, picking up as we move further to the west, getting as high as 25 knots west of Wainwright, and then diminishing back down to 20 knots out of a northeasterly direction by Cape Lisburne, and becoming light and more variable around 10 knots as we get into the Kotzebue Sound area, and then southerly winds through the strait, 15 knots expected. On Tuesday, primarily southerly winds along the west coast, 10 to 15 knots, becoming easterly and increasing in speed as we get further to the north. Easterly winds 15 to 20 knots on the northwest coastline, dropping down but staying out of the east as we move into the Beaufort Sea area, 10 to 15 knots expected. Recap for tonight's weather. We'll start off in the Bering Sea where we have dominant high pressure out over the area, producing a lot of stratus and fog for the eastern, or for all of the Aleutian Islands into the Bering Sea, mixing with rain in some areas where we have short waves moving overhead and coming into the mainland part of the state out of the west coast and down into southwest Alaska, seeing some rain and mixing with fog out over the water. And then we do have a low pressure system by Kodiak Island bringing rain to the area, extending up into the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula. And then in the southern and eastern portions of the interior, expecting some rain to drift down into south central Alaska as well. Some of those evening thunderstorms diminishing. Shouldn't be too many thunderstorms overnight, however. And then down in the Panhandle area, expecting to see some lighter shower activity, especially in the southern locations. So move into Monday, continuing to see showers throughout the Panhandle area. Should be fairly light. And those are going to extend into some of South Central as well, especially higher elevations. And then as we get down to Kodiak Island area, some rain down there as well due to the low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska. Thunderstorms expected in the eastern portions of the interior in the afternoon and evening hours. Then widespread fog out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands due to high pressure lingering out over the area, and Bristol Bay mixing with rain.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.